it's Jennifer from heysealemon. I've seen a lot of comments on my YouTube videos and across my social links on asking for suggestions for paper on your covers and pages. So I thought I'd make a video going over some tips on paper for your bookbinding projects. First off, here are some factors to keep in mind when you're choosing paper. Paper choice is very much up to your preference. It can depend on your binding method, your size of your book, and the medium that you're putting on your pages. Ask yourself, is this book going to be for writing, sketching, note-taking, painting, maybe a little bit of both, before you choose your paper, so that way you know what to look for. Availability can affect the size and color of your paper as well. I tend to stick to 8.5 by 11 inch paper, which is the letter size, because it's the most accessible to me. It's the easiest to find. And sometimes I fold that in half to trim it down and make smaller books. You can also do that with 11 by 17 inch paper, which is like the second most common size. You can fold that in half to make pages or signatures for 8.5 by 11 inch page sizes. If you're cutting your paper into a specific size, you may want to invest into a cutter or trimmer. I use this little one right here. You can also go to a print shop or art shop and use their cutting service for a fee. They usually have larger and heavy-duty cutting equipment, and either option of you or them cutting it is going to be easier and more convenient than trimming out each page by hand with a blade. Another thing you want to factor in is the grain of your paper. I explained this in my last video about how to prevent warping in your paper and books. Basically, the rule of thumb is that you always want your grain going in the same direction as the spine of your book. This will prevent warping in your book and pages, but it is really difficult to find paper in the size you want with the grain going in that direction. Plus, if you want to fold it into signatures, that makes it even more difficult to find the size you want. You can also look at the paper and do certain methods to find which direction the grain is going, and I do show that in that video as well. If you buy your paper from a paper supplier, you can see on the package if it says long grain or short grain. And if it says long grain, that means that the grain is going parallel to the longest dimension of the paper. So in this case, 11 inches is the longest, and that's the way the grain is going, which is vertical, and that's the most common for 8.5 by 11 inch paper. And short grain means that it's going parallel to the shortest dimension in your paper. Like I mentioned in that video on how to prevent warping, it's really not the end of the world if your book has a slight warp to it. It's still going to function, and it's sometimes so subtle that it really doesn't bother me. But if you want control over the grain of your paper and you really want a precise book, you might want to talk to a paper supplier so that you can pick out the paper that you want. Alright, now on to the types of paper and how to decide your paper selection. For cover paper, I like to stick to heavier weight paper like cardstock, Bristol. Some decorative pattern papers are a good weight to use. These are too thick to use as the paper for your pages, in my opinion, but they work great for covers and end pages, and the thicker the paper, the better it's going to hold the glue and not wrinkle on you, and it's just more durable in the long run for outside covers. You can also find heavier weight paper in other things that you can recycle, like posters. Whether it's a gloss or matte finish is really up to your preference, and if you want some ideas on how to protect your book cover, I have an entire other video on that subject. You can check that out right here for more ideas on how to do that. For something like sketchbooks or books that I'm going to be painting in, I like to go up to the art store and get art pads like drawing paper pads or watercolor pads. I find it easy and convenient, and the quality is really good. I can feel the paper while I'm there, and I like the thickness of it. The only drawback is that they can be kind of pricey, or sometimes they come in limited quantities. So you might only get like 15 to 20 sheets in a pad, so you really need to buy multiples to make a really thick book. But it's really up to your preference and what you find easiest. Another option for sketch or paint books is you can get the large sheets of art paper from the art store and trim it down to the size that you want. Another type you can try is a ream of paper. These usually come in 500 sheets, so if you say I need a ream of paper, it's a 500 sheet block of paper, and they usually come in 8.5 by 11 inch size, or the other most common is 11 by 17 inch. Reams of copy paper, like the ones you can find at a office supply supply store are usually the cheapest, and the quality of the paper is usually kind of the cheapest, and it's really thin, but it really does make great paper for something like a notepad. Another common printer paper is a 20 to 24 pound ream. It's affordable. That paper works fine if you're making a journal out of it or if you're using it for just writing. But I found if I'm using ink on it, like a lot of ink, maybe it's a painting book, I don't tend to use that paper because it's just too thin for my liking and it will leave some wrinkles. If you want a higher quality, heavier weight ream of paper, you'll want to try visiting a local paper supply shop, and you might want to search and find those. You might even find that you have one in your area that you didn't even know about. The great thing is that they usually have samples of the paper out, so you don't have to purchase the whole block of paper, the whole ream of paper, before knowing what it's going to feel like. There's one that I like to go to in the Arizona area, and I'll put that link down below, but I really don't know what other paper shops there are in other areas in the US, especially not outside of the US, so you might just want to do some searching. But if you can't find one in your local area, there are many paper suppliers online. They're really good quality too. There's some like Nina, Mohawk, Domtar. There's a lot of ones, and I will put a full list in the description below if you want to check that out. And you can fill out a form on their website if you want a paper sample. It's very common to get samples of paper from paper suppliers, so sometimes it's free. You might pay for shipping, but you can request the samples of paper before you buy the entire ream of paper. More on paper weight. If you're unfamiliar with the different weights of paper, I recommend getting a swatch book from one of those sites that I just mentioned in the description below, or go to your local print shop or paper shop and ask if they have a free swatch book available for you to look at. It really helps to see the paper in person, to feel it, to know what you want in your sketchbook. When I worked as a full-time graphic designer, I always used a swatch book because I always had to refer back to it when I needed to figure out what paper I'm going to print that job on. So they are a great resource, and that's kind of why I know a lot about the weights of paper. It's because I had to use them a lot, but they are also really pretty. Sometimes you can get a swatch book that is very nicely designed. Like, paper companies go all out to promote the paper that they have, so they will find nice design to put onto these papers. Really great photography, and you might find yourself just wanting to keep the swatch book. So these swatch books made by paper companies will tell you all the specifics of the reams of paper that you can purchase, and you can just go through it and figure out which smoothness you like, which brightness, and which weight of paper. I like 60 to 70 pound text for my all-purpose writing and sketching paper, but again, it's totally up to your preference. Paper labeled as text is really good for pages inside your book, and paper labeled as cover is obviously better for cover paper. And a little tip in case this is confusing, because it was for me, as far as I was told, if you see like a split like this, for example, this 2870 pound split. 28 pound is what was used before everything went digital in the printing and paper making, and then when digital came along, they changed it to something like 70 pound or a different pound label. It's kind of a carryover from the old way of labeling things, but it is kind of confusing. I hope you found all of that helpful. I know this was like an intense go through of paper. Yes, I get really nerdy about my paper. I have like a paper collection. I'm kind of a paper hoarder, kind of obsessed with paper. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and if there's anything that I missed, leave a question or comment below. And if you have experience with different paper that others can benefit from, share your experience in the comment below so others can read it. If you have other questions on basic bookbinding, check out this playlist right here. It has all my past videos on just basic bookbinding subjects and tips and supplies. So if you have another question, odds are it might be answered in one of those videos. For more on bookbinding and DIY projects, be sure to subscribe to my channel, heysealemon. For some easy ways on how to make a gilded book edge, check out this video right here. And if you want to learn how to make lines on your paper, check out that video on the right. I will see you guys next time.